I want to talk a little bit about why the Conservation Foundation is important to me, why I think it's important to our community, and why I think it's important to our future, and why it is a good entity to get behind and to support. I grew up in Naperville in the 1950s and the 1960s, and it was a dramatically different place at that time. It was rapidly changing. It was going from a small farm community to sort of the heart of suburbia. And subdivisions were replacing cornfields and forests. It was an exciting time, but it was also a time where if you had a love of the environment, or thought you did, that it was a time of concern. And I was lucky enough to be brought up in a family that we did a fair amount of camping and spent time outside and liked the outdoors, to be quite frank, and valued it. So it was kind of, an interesting time in Naperville at that point. There was really no conservation groups out there. There was talk about conservation, but it was more on a national or a global level. And when you looked at the local level, it was just like, well, this is the way it is, and this is the way it's going to be. One of the amenities that we had in Naperville was the west branch of the DuPage River. And it was a very cool place for young kids to hang out at. We didn't have too many rules in our family. It was kind of turn us loose in the morning, come home for dinner, and don't get in trouble, don't do stupid things, don't get hurt. One of the few rules was stay away from the DuPage River. And that's because it was essentially an open sewer. It had some fish in it, but they were all carp, and so we spent a fair amount of time down there fishing for carp. There were rumors that it had been a trout stream at one point back in the 30s, and that it had bass in it and stuff like that, but none of us really believed that. We just thought there's no way that any fish could survive in this place. And there was garbage and junk and all kinds of things. Pretty much anything you can imagine was floating in the river, and it just stank. I mean, if you went down to the river, there were all these small sewage disposal plants that didn't work very well. And essentially, whenever you got very close to the river, it was like being in an outhouse. So it was kind of depressing, and there wasn't really, we didn't see any hope for that river ever to be cleaned up. We just thought, well, this is the way it is, and this is the way it's going to be. Well, life marches on, and I went away to college, went to law school, and made that big decision of what am I going to do? Am I going to live in the city and practice law there, or am I going to move away? Am I going to move downstate where I went to college, or am I going to come back to suburbia, come back to Naperville, which is my home? And I made the decision to come to DuPage County, to come to Naperville, and I have lived in Naperville ever since. I almost have never lived outside of Naperville. And when I went to work for the county in 1980 as a prosecutor, I thought, well, I'm going to want to try and get involved in something. And the Naperville experience was still going on. They were still chopping down the forest. They were making dramatic changes. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and do something. If nothing else, I know where all the cool places are in Naperville. I know the forests, and maybe I can help to preserve some land. So I ran for the Naperville Park Board. They had the power of condemnation. They were a relatively new entity, having been just formed in 1966. Parks were important in Naperville. The law was changing on them. And so I got involved with that. We built a variety of parks. I got involved with the Naperville Riverwalk Commission, which was really the first entity that said, hey, maybe this river has some value to our community, and maybe we should look at it in some different way than just as a dump or an open sewer. And from being on the park board, I found that the Forest Preserve District had a better opportunity to preserve open space. I ended up there, and we had a lot of success using government money to buy open space and to enlarge the forest preserve. But there was still really no conservation group that was advocating on behalf of the people. There was no place where you could go for conservation expertise or to be together with like-minded people. I left the Forest Preserve District in 1992, and a group of people led by Gene Connell, who was then the only employee at the, what was originally the Forest Foundation, and then it had just become the Conservation Foundation, asked me if maybe I might want to get involved. And I thought, wow, this seems like a great opportunity. Mighty small organization. I think we had a very small office, one-person staff. We had had some pretty good-sized donors who had been helpful, but it was really sort of a private club. It wasn't an institution where it was inviting the people to come join. So I did get involved. I became a board member in 1992 and ultimately became the president, and I spent 6 years there. And during that time, I recognized how important the Conservation Foundation was, one, to me, because it gave me an opportunity to meet with people who thought the same way I did, to put our skills together to try and bring change to our community. And the foundation gave me that opportunity, and it was also, I think, great for our community. We had people with expertise there who told us how we could actually clean up the river, how we could hold land and save it until we had the money to get it, how we could take a look at these sewage disposal plants and analyze what they were doing to determine if they were doing the right thing. So the Conservation Foundation filled a big niche in my life. I think it filled a big niche in our community. Because if you look at the river now, I don't think there's any trout in that river, but I know that there's some bass in there. And I know that it's not an open sewer anymore because of the tons and tons of garbage that's been taken out of it. And there has been substantial change made. And much of that change has been made because of you and the other people at the Conservation Foundation who have been committed to doing that. That you've used your expertise, you've used your money, and you've come together to make a real difference. So I guess what I would say about the Conservation Foundation is it certainly gave me hope that we could change things, and I think time has shown that we have done that. It's brought like-minded people together, and we know a group is always stronger than individuals. And it's brought tremendous expertise, and with that, advocacy power to change our environment and to show that we can have a substantial difference in suburbia and improve our environment. So I want to thank you all for the leadership that you've provided, the leadership that you are going to continue to provide, and the support that you give to the Conservation Foundation. There's a lot more work to be done. We want to make sure that we don't backslide. We want to make sure that we continue to clean up our rivers, that we continue to protect open space. So we need you. We need to bring others into the organization. We need your time. We need your financial support. So thank you for all you've done, and thank you for allowing me to be part of this group for so many years.